If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedman.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Today's interview is one that I featured at the beginning of the year, and it got such high ratings that I thought how fitting it would be to end the year repeating the same interview. So without further ado, let me introduce you to today's special guest. Today, my special guest is Natasha Miller. Natasha isn't your average CEO. She sits at the helm of Entire Productions, the go-to experience design, event, and entertainment production company in San Francisco, and has been on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies in America for 3 years in a row. She's the Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author of Relentless, Homeless Teen to Achieving the Entrepreneur Dream. Natasha's passion and commitment to giving back drives her invariable contributions and participation with numerous charitable organizations, particularly homeless youth programs. And in her spare time, she performs as a jazz vocalist and trained classical violinist. Natasha, it's truly a pleasure to welcome you to the show, and thank you for being this week's guest expert and mentor.
Thank you, Susan. And just to note that I'm going to use your introduction on everything I do. So
I love it.
With your voice, your accent, your diction, your enunciation, it was beautiful.
Well, thank you. My previous guest said it's mellifluous. I was like, oh, I love that word. Any event, let's talk about Natasha, because your recent book, Relentless, I can't recommend it enough. It is such a beautiful story about a very hard and very challenging time, obviously, in your life. It's memoir. I know that memoir is a topic that we actually haven't talked about at all in the whole 7 years that we've been doing podcasts. I've really never had anybody who has written a memoir as beautifully as you've written yours, and the special additions and insertions of your voice and the jazz aspect. I mean, listeners, you've got to listen to Natasha's book. Reading it is one thing, but if you listen to it, it'll just blow you away because she reads it as well. I'm going on, but Natasha, let's talk about memoir. And let's talk about, first of all, what is memoir? Because it's become such a trendy topic at the moment. I think it's important for our listeners to understand what exactly it is. And then we'll talk about why you wrote yours.
Sure. My understanding of memoir has definitely been shaped and changed from the time I started to today. And I would say right now, memoir really is moments of your life that are finely, highly selected and point to one theme. It's easier to say what a memoir isn't. And the memoir is not your entire life story from the time you were born to now. It is not a journal. It is not an essay about your life. For me as a reader, I would want to read a memoir that is written like a beautiful work of fiction, with that kind of prose and language and color and suspense, versus, okay, this happened then, and then this is the outcome and next chapter. I think that it needs to be really concise and specific to one outcome. It has to be hand-picked of high and low inflection points that balance out well. It has to include some levity or humor, and you have to be willing to be vulnerable and share things with your readers that might be uncomfortable. I think that is the number one thing that if you're not ready to do or you will not do is share something that is vulnerable and not just one thing, but maybe at least two things, then perhaps you shouldn't consider writing your memoir.
I know from having read yours, and it's not a genre that I would normally read, but because I got to know you and I was like, yes, I'll read this. And especially because I knew that we were going to have this interview. It's very raw. There's a lot of very raw material. You're very vulnerable here. Let's talk about why did you consider doing this? Because your story is quite something. And I don't want to give it away to our listeners who are going to rush out and go and listen to this.
The subtitle gives away a bit, but there are things in the book that the subtitle does not relate to. And there's some zingers in there. I mean, they were zingers to me. So if, they will be for the listener or the reader as well. The reason I wrote it was I was at a conference 5 years ago. It was for entrepreneurs, and I was trying to learn how to scale and grow my business. So I did not pay a lot of money, the money that I spent to go to this, to learn the aha moment of it's time to write my memoir. But that is actually what happened. And I'm so thankful for that. I had not let people know about my past up until that moment. And honestly, I think it's okay that I kept it to myself until then. That was the right time for me to start saying out loud some of the things that happened to me. I had distance and reflection in my back pocket instead of it just happened and now I'm going to write about it. And I think that's also important. I thought, Susan, that my story was so unique and so incredible and wild, and that people would be definitely entertained and shocked and awed by. But as I started writing it, I also knew that this would be helpful to people that are seeking success and advancement. But I didn't know a lot of the things that actually were the outcomes after, which we can talk about later. I'm so glad that I did this. This is definitely something that has changed, rearranged, and transformed my life.
Now, let's get it straight. This was not therapy, correct?
No, but I highly suggest that you go into therapy if you haven't yet while you're doing it, because things are going to come up. They're going to come up and erupt within yourself. But let me tell you a secret, Susan. You're going to learn things about yourself and your family while you're writing it that you never knew. And you will probably remember what one of those things was for me. And let's not tell anyone, because that's the teaser. I discovered something within writing my book that I would have never discovered had I not written this book, that blew me away. And then after, the skeletons continue to fly out of the closet. You got to be prepared mentally and physically and emotionally to deal with that.
So it sounds like that you obviously were not expecting this, that things sort of took on a whole life of their own, this whole just writing this, that you went in with one idea, but it sounds as if there was some transformation along the way. It turned into something more than what you had originally gone in to write about. Is that correct?
Absolutely, full stop. And maybe don't start to write a memoir if you're weary or hesitant to experience all these crazy things that may come out. One of the things I want to clarify is I thought I was special and unique, and that I lived such a challenging, traumatic life, and that I became a successful entrepreneur. But what I've come to learn is that 75% of successful people have had challenges in their upbringing, from alcoholism, parents not paying attention, abandonment, drug use, lots of things like that. It was a little bit of a wake-up call to me to say, you're not that special. But I will say that I hope that most people have not experienced what I personally experienced.
That's obviously made you who you are. I mean, it sounds, just from what I've experienced, is that if you want something, you're just going to go out and get it, no matter what. I mean, there's no stopping you. Yes, exactly. I mean, that definitely comes out loud and clear. in the book. Writing memoir is one thing. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a trend out there. You wrote yours. Now, the next thing is, who wants to read this and why?
Mm-hmm. Who I thought wanted to read it and why, that's happening. But there's another thing happening, is that there's a whole other group of people reading it that if you would have asked me, I would have said there's no way. And I'll tell you what that is. So I figured women ages 25 to about 65 would be the target demographic, and maybe on the older side of that demographic. And probably that same group that are entrepreneurs would be my, so female entrepreneurs from 25 to 65. Those people are reading the book and they are enjoying it, and I'm hearing from them. Who I'm hearing from more than women, and not to say that more of these people are reading the book, but men that are in their 35 to 65 range. And most of them are entrepreneurs because that's the circle that they discovered my book in. And they are sending me screenshots of their underlined and highlighted passages. On a podcast that I did a couple of weeks ago, a very high-powered male entrepreneur, like hundreds of millions of dollars worth of revenue, was so intense with me in the preamble, to the conversation. And he brought something up to me, which really resonated with him. And by the way, these men are resonating with different parts of the book. So it's not like all men are saying, oh, this one thing that really resonated with me. I am not quite sure what's going on, but I'm starting to ask them, why did you even read the book in the first place? And what is so meaningful to you? So the one thing this particular man did was he was very touched with the little note that my daughter had written to me during the pandemic for Mother's Day. Then he read that note aloud on the podcast. So for him, that was a major important takeaway. And I am here for it. I love it. I love that it's affecting both men and women. And I'm very surprised that it's affecting men.
And also, the demographic is so large. I mean, when authors come to me and I say, well, who's your audience? And let's say you would come to me with that. I would have loved to have published this book, but I know we didn't. And next time. However, if you'd said the demographic was 25 to 65, female entrepreneurs, professionals, or men with that same, 35 to 65, I'm like, Natasha, you've got to narrow that down. Mm-hmm. That's too huge a market to even think about going after. It sounds as if those people, what they have in common is the element of being an entrepreneur.
Yep, absolutely.
So that sounds as if it's the market that you have spent time marketing, and help me with that. Tell us more about how you've gone about actually marketing the book.
I had a 25-point monster marketing plan. I put all eggs in the baskets. This was very important to me. I had produced 7 CDs of my life's work as a musician, and this book seemed even bigger, much bigger than any one of those releases, which they all feel like my babies. So I created this checklist of initiatives and strategies that I wanted to do. I knew that I would market to, I'm an entrepreneurs organization. So to that group, that's 15,000 people all over the world. Also YPO. I'm the leader of the authors group in the Forbes Business Council. My world really is entrepreneurs. That is 90% of who I spend time with. That's outside of my family and neighborhood. I have access to these people. I did an incredible, very detailed influencer box campaign where not only did I create this beautiful printed 3D box that shipped with my book, but I had a 14 karat gold necklace created that says Relentless in my handwriting engraved. I put things in the box that had to do with the book, like scratch and sniff popcorn stickers and malted milk balls. There was also 2 postcards that were stamped, and it says, you've got to read this book, for the person receiving it to send out to whoever they wanted to. In return, these people did social media campaigns. They had me on their podcast. They had me speak on their stage. They wrote a blog post, they wrote an article. They could choose how they wanted to support me. And I reached out to a little bit over 100 people, and 75 people said yes and were in that program. That was one of 25 things that I did.
Oh my goodness.
I know. I'm going to be honest right now. It was a little manic. It was a lot of excitement. And I knew that I wanted this book. This was not a business card book. This wasn't, I'm trying to get more business for Entire Productions or any of my other things. Yes, it may lead to more business in everything that I do, but you read the book. It's not a sales book by any means. In fact, some people might read it and go, oh boy, I'm not sure about this one.
Well, it just makes you realize that, again, like I said before, that whole idea of being relentless, I mean, that's a perfect title for it. You are relentless. And really the message for me was that if you want to get something, that you have to be relentless about it. To get what you want is like, yeah, go out and get it and just keep getting it, even though you get knocked down.
Oh, yeah. Being knocked down is sometimes a help because it just fuels the fire. I'm now giving an experiential keynote that's called It's Not Enough to Be Resilient. And in that title, I don't give, you have to be relentless, but that is within the speech. Resilience just bounces you back to where you were before you had this challenge. And you have to be relentless to get past where you're at today and to your dreams and what you want to be successful in, and quite possibly past that mark. I can tell you for sure, Susan, that I have exceeded any expectations anyone else had of me, and definitely the expectations I had for myself. And yes, I have imposter syndrome. And yes, I think, oh, that's not for me. And you know what I do with that? I push it away and I just charge forward. And with the imposter syndrome part, instead of feeling that I'm not worthy, I hunker down and learn what it is that I have a deficit in so that I become confident. It's pretty easy.
Oh, so easy. Just like that. Yes. We could do a whole program just on that one subject alone.
Yep.
What did you want the book, or what do you want the book to do for you?
I think I didn't have this in words before, but I knew it would be a significant legacy piece for what I had accomplished. And really what I had accomplished for myself, it was more of the emotional and mental and historical and family things that I changed, right? I changed the generation of potential future abuse. Having that legacy out there, knowing that I could help people by a nudge or a push or maybe transformation was very important to me. Also, I was the only one in my family that wasn't considered a writer. And I wasn't really trying to prove that I was a writer. I'd been a songwriter. I do okay with copy. But like my grandmother, as you read in the book, was a professionally published author of family communication books. I wanted to prove my value in my family above and beyond the other things that I was doing to prove that. And this was one of them. So it was cathartic. Yes, it had to do with some therapy because it's therapeutic, but I'd worked on so many things in therapy before. You can't really write a great memoir if you haven't reconciled a lot of what you went through.
Yeah. And it's like giving a keynote speech and you're sharing a very raw subject material story. You just can't break down in the middle of it.
No.
This isn't a therapy session. So, yeah, in the same way, the book, yes, there's catharsis and there is an element of therapy, but that's not why you're doing it.
No, and the reasons kept changing, Susan, and building. And I would say the outcomes are changing and building and growing. And I think they will for quite some time. And appreciating that journey and allowing it to be many different things instead of just the one thing you thought it would be is, something to embrace.
making a difference. And as you said, looking to change behavior for the next generation and future generations. I know that homeless youth programs are something that you're very involved in. How do you feel you're impacting those people because they've gone through so much in their life and they're still young? How do you feel that perhaps you're making an impact with them?
Well, I've spoken in Los Angeles to the Covenant House. And it was interesting because when I went there, this was a few years ago, here I am, a white woman talking to them about like the potential career in events. Nobody wanted to hear about that from me. You know, they're taking one look at me and they're like, we don't identify with this woman. Like, oh, whatever. But when I stood up, this is what I said. I own a multi-million-dollar business that's profitable. And I used to live in a place just like this one here. They got up and were hooting and hollering and clapping. And I had their attention the entire time because what they saw was their potential. And we don't wear that on our sleeves, right? I don't have a badge when I go outside to the grocery store, right? That says, this is what I experienced. And people do judge each other by the way we look and hold ourselves. And that day, I was able to meet them where they were. And I try to do that everywhere I go because no one was paying attention to me. No one was coming to save me. And I so desperately wanted someone to. And if I can give someone that's similar to me back in those days some sort of comfort and hope, I'm so honored to do that. I wasn't the beneficiary of that growing up.
That's incredible. Yes, but the impact that you have, and I know for me, it would make so much more difference to who I'm being, that I'm having an impact, even if it just changes one child and
Oh,
the
you know what?
future of one child.
Susan, that's so funny you bring that up because I set out, you know, when I was marketing this book and I said this, I don't want to just affect one person. Why on earth would I go through all of this and write a book and publish it, market it to affect one person? I want to affect every single person that reads or listens to this book in some manner. That's how I look at it. But I think that's my all-in personality also.
Yeah, because you want to do things big. I mean, you're not happy with doing things small. It's like the big. Yes, I totally get that. And I bet with these kids, if you started singing to them, I bet they just love that. I mean, your voice is so incredible. Your marketing, as you said, was like over the top. Let's say we're talking to authors who don't necessarily have the kind of marketing budget that perhaps you put into
Right.
marketing your book.
Mm-hmm.
What are some simple shoestring budget type things that they could think about doing? And especially marketing a memoir, let's say, because I think memoir is very different from a regular nonfiction book that's in a certain topic for a specific audience. Yours is much broader.
Yes. So I think it starts with, honestly, the book cover. That is such a number one of the marketing situation that you have to have in mind. I believe my book has done as well as it has in great part because of the cover art. I believe that even Publishers Weekly and Kirkus Reviews, who reviewed the book, very, very highly recommended. I think the cover subconsciously or consciously or both really has to do with that. And then I think being able to define and refine your pitch to know exactly what to say, how much and how little to various people, to various media outlets is so important. So what I say to you, Susan, to ignite your potential, interest in my book will be different than what I say to one of my male EO friends or to one of the people at the homeless shelter. My pitch will be short, concise, to the point. We'll want them going, oh my God, I have to read this. And I know this works because I can see it, like we're in a group together. When I talked to people about my book, I could see people literally typing on their keyboard, and then I could see in the chat, I just got your book. I just got your book. I just downloaded your book. So I know the pitch works. Learning how to pitch, there's a lot of information online about that. You can also take courses. They can be inexpensive to incredibly expensive. But I think that is one thing that any author should learn how to do. But for memoir, it's the story, right? It's the story, it's the color, it's the entertainment, it's the potential suspense. And it's also, of course, what that end reader sees in themselves, right? So as you're reading my book, you have to be able to find yourself, not in the entire thing, but in a few things, right? You have to find yourself. So in order to market a really great memoir, you have to write a really great memoir so that you can pull from it.
And yes, I believe you've achieved that. I mean, as I said, I'm not a memoir specialist by any stretch of the imagination, but I know when I like a book, and I know it was one of those page turners, I could not put it down. I had to keep listening. And I'm remembering that I'm standing there waiting at the gate for a Southwest flight, and I'm listening to your book. I can just see myself now listening. I was like, oh my goodness, this wasn't what I was expecting.
Yeah.
Yeah, not that I really knew exactly what I was expecting, but it was more than. And
Thank you.
yeah,
I think in writing a memoir, now I didn't fictionalize anything. I didn't over dramatize anything. And in fact, while I was writing the book, I went through all my journals that I kept since age 10 to make sure that I wasn't inflating the traumatic experience, because I thought that I might have done that. What I found, Susan, was that in fact, I had made less of it. And that was a really hard, I would say, few weeks of reading through those journals. It was pretty dark, but knowing for sure that I didn't make something up. Now, of course, it's my vantage point, right? It's my own lens. My dad, my mother, my brothers all have their own experiences, but it's pretty close to what I'm writing about, if they are being honest with themselves. And I think that you have to make sure that you keep your reader in mind and that you write something that they don't want to put down. You don't want someone reading a book going, oh, I feel like I have to get through this and I'm on the 4th chapter and right? That's not what I wanted for my readers. And so I did end chapters with the intent of suspense or with the intent of, I'm not letting you go.
very much so. And the beauty and the craftsmanship of a good writer, and also that idea of the cliffhanger, you're just leaving someone suspended and you've just got to go to the next chapter because you're like, well, what happened? Now, the other thing that when people tell their stories, when they're so dramatic like yours, I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know anything like this could happen. I mean, I grew up in a very, middle class background. Yes. And as I mentioned to you, I thought that perhaps, in today's parlance, I had a dad he had a temper. In today's parlance, we would have talked about it as perhaps being verbally abusive. But I didn't experience the kind of abuse that you did. So I'm thinking, do you need us to relate to that? Do we have to feel as if, oh my goodness, I just don't know what this really feels like or is like? Help me with that.
Well, I didn't want to take people into like the darkest depths. My book was related to another book called A Child Called It. And when I read that book, I was like consumed with sobbing. Like I was ugly crying on my bed as I read this book. And I didn't want to do that to my reader. Yes, I wanted to show you and share with you what it was like for me, what it felt like. And I wanted you to see the fuel of the fire that was creating some of these choices that I was making in the future. Now, you may not have resonated or related to that, but there are other things that happen in the book that might be more subtle or, less confrontational. And you probably felt some kinship to me somewhere in there. And I don't know where that is. It's different for everyone. But I had gone through a lot of things. There's got to be at some point something that I went through that you went through, right?
And I can tell you what it is. It was literally that perseverance and that relentless approach that I've had, in many of the things that I've done. It's like, I'm not just giving up. I mean, when somebody says no, I'm going to say, I'll prove you that that's not the case.
Correct. It's like,
it can be done. Yes.
Thank you for that no, because you just gave me a shot of adrenaline.
Yeah, just a reminder of that. And by the way, I know this book, A Child Called It, and the gentleman, and I know his first name's David, and I can't remember his last name, but
Peltzer.
Okay, yes. He actually came and spoke to us at the National Speakers Association many years ago. And I remember him talking about his experience, and it's horrible. Again, that was so far-fetched. I really could not relate to that at all. So I'm pleased you didn't do that.
No need to do that.
No need to do that. No need to do that. Natasha, we could go on, I know, and there's so much we could talk about with this. And I'd be interested to hear from our listeners what they might want to know more about. And so we could potentially do a part 2 of this, because there's so much that you could get into with the whole idea of memoir. How can our listeners find out more about you, get the book? Tell us.
Well, I am happy to report that I finally, after over 30 years, got my domain of my actual name back. So it's natashamiller.com. You can find out about the book and about everything that I'm doing there. Of course, the book is available on all digital platforms. I would love for you to listen to it if listening to books is something that you do. And if not, of course, reading the book or the Kindle would be great.
And as I say, I would recommend listening to it just because there's music. And it's Natasha singing. Am I allowed to say that?
Yes. In fact, any music that you hear is from one of my 7 CDs or a live performance, and it's all me. And I really did map it out to where it's relevant to what is being read or narrated by me. So it's relevant to the text.
Yes, it certainly is. I was like, who would write a song that was so relevant? She must have done incredible research. It took me a while to realize, oh my goodness, this is Natasha's actually singing. I'm slow sometimes. What can I tell you?
They were written long before the book. So,
but the next question is, what's the follow-up to this? I mean, how do you, top this?
I'll tell you how. It's being optioned to be a film, a feature film. So that's a whole new experience for me. And, who knows what will really come of it, but that is the next thing. And I am helping entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and industry titans write the story of their life through my program, Memoir Sherpa. And I am so passionate about it. And I think if you have an extraordinary story, I want to hear about it. And I want to be part of getting that out into the world.
Beautiful. Yes, I would highly agree that there are stories, I think, that people could be telling that we could all learn from, as long as they're not too far-fetched. But that's me. That's my preference. What can I say? Natasha, if you were to leave our listeners with a golden nugget, what would that be?
I would say this: if you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, my story's not that interesting, or we've heard these, from rags to riches stories forever. Nobody's going to want to hear my story. I would challenge you on that. Know that for sure that your voice and your own personal experiences and the intricacies of that story are necessary to be heard, and to stop doing that to yourself. And that you could really look at that as you owe it to yourself to put your legacy down on paper and digital for not only you and your family and everyone to learn from now, but forever. Otherwise, it gets lost in translation and forgotten.
Yeah,
So,
your legacy to the world. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, is the idea of just affecting one person. If you can save one person, you can save the world. It's like, it's one person at a time that you can change lives. Yes, you're doing an incredible job. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this wisdom with us. And listeners, yes, do listen to this again. This is so touching. And as I say, listen to the book, Relentless. Go check it out. By the way, if your book isn't selling the way you wanted or expected it to, let's jump on a quick call together to brainstorm ways to ramp up those sales, because you've invested a whole lot of time, money, and energy, and it's time you got the return you were hoping for. Go to brainstormwithsusan.com to schedule a free 20-minute call with me. In the meantime, I hope this powerful interview sparks some ideas you can use to sell more books. So until next week, here's wishing you much book and author marketing success.